Hello, everybody. Just making some last-second notes here. So, yes, welcome. Shadow at Night for Thursday, October the 30th, 2025. On the show tonight, a $100 billion deficit. A budget that's going to come in $100 billion over budget. That means more outgo, $100 billion more outgo than income. And the guy at the head of it all is supposed to be a financial genius. I don't know how you square that circle. We're going to talk about that tonight. Also, is Mark Carney corrupt? Is he really corrupt? I always say where there's smoke, there's fire. And so naturally, that fire should be investigated, or the smoke should be investigated until we actually do find the fire. Even though there's probably hundreds and hundreds of bureaucrats trying to cover up the mess, and several elected representatives in committees trying to filibuster so questions cannot be asked. I found a scathing editorial op-ed from the National Post that goes back 5, 6, 7 years regarding Mark Carney when his book Values first came out. And I'm wondering, why would anybody write an op-ed on Mark Carney? Back then, we barely knew who he was. He was at one time the Bank of Canada governor. Then he went on to become the governor of the Bank of England, and he had some jobs in the United Nations. And of course, Brookfield Asset Management, we knew that. But back then, I mean, he wasn't in the public consciousness. He was not in the public sphere. Nobody cared about Mark Carney. Why would we? But this is a very interesting piece. So we're going to get to that in just a little bit. And parental rights, do they exist in Canada? This is a question I wanted to ask John Carpe when he was on the other night, and we got into so many other things I forgot. So next time John is on, we'll definitely get that question asked. The Shadow at Night live stream, as always, brought to you by CanadaNanoSilver.com.
Today we're comparing Crest toothpaste to Silver Circles toothpaste. First, we're starting out with Crest. It's a classic, it's an original, it's what I've used most of my life. But that being said, it does have its problems. First off, the consistency is so weird and thick, and I get it's a paste, but it really doesn't spread that well. And I must also say that I'm not in love with the taste. I get toothpaste isn't supposed to taste good, but why shouldn't it? But that being said, it does get the job done. Next we have Silver Suticals. They have 3 flavors, but today we're going with Bubbleberry. And already it smells so good. So I'm excited to see what this tastes like. The consistency is also a lot smoother, and I must say it spreads way nicer in your mouth.
This literally tastes like fruit bubblegum.
Yeah, this toothpaste was pretty good. I actually went in for seconds, and it's infused with nano silver, so it helps remineralize your teeth and keep them fresh throughout the day.
100% go with Silver Circle.
And here's the results. What's your favorite toothpaste?
CanadaNanoSilver.com, 204-808-9292. You can always email, too, for more information, info@CanadaNanoSilver.com. Hello, Barb, watching from southern Manitoba on Facebook. Lulu is on Facebook as well. Krista, hello, how are you? Linda's watching tonight. Rita is watching on YouTube tonight. She's also an all-access Nighthawk subscriber at shadowdavis.com. Laura, hello, and Beausejour. Christine is watching in Anola, Manitoba. Kathy and Fox Warren. Hello, Ernie, watching in Medicine Hat. Clint watching from special areas. Special areas. I don't know. Bob is watching in Sudbury. Hello, Edna in Victoria. Gabby is watching tonight as well on Facebook. And we've got all kinds of people on X. We've got a lot of people on Rumble tonight and some on YouTube as well. Kiva and Jimmy are watching on Rumble, and Dog Lips is there too. Arnie7 as well. No matter what platform you're watching on tonight, you guys, get it out there, like and share as much as you possibly can. So before we get into it, I have another viewer email here. As most of you know, this show will be signing off social media as of tomorrow night. Tomorrow night will be the last one. And then we're moving the show to the website, shadowdavis.com. And if you're planning on becoming an all-access member, that's awesome. I urge you to join our group on Telegram. It's called the Shadow at Night Community. We've got a lot of new members in there, and we've got all kinds of great people waiting to welcome you back there. So, dear Shadow, I first discovered your show during Freedom Convoy in 2022, and I've been with you ever since. I believe you give incredible insight into the state of our country and the world at large. When I found out last week you were signing the show off due to lack of support, I was sad at first. Then I got mad at them. I would assume that this person is talking about viewers, and you. You and them, meaning me and you, say you're about the truth, about freedom, and getting it out there. Yet now you say you'll hide behind a paywall, so those of us who can't afford to pay won't see. Shame on you, selfish, grifting, expletive. And again, I'm not going to give names. So let me address the first thing. I used to host a podcast about mental wellness. This was right after I was fired from Chorus Entertainment, about 2017. And one thing I learned through my struggles, and if I was to give any advice at all, what I would say is, as a person who is a caregiver, and most people, most parents, they're caregivers. They're giving care to somebody. And sometimes that can become overwhelming because you're always making sure that everybody else is okay. But what happens to them if you're not okay? What are they going to do if you don't make it through? What happens then? And that's how I feel, kinda. I mean, there's so many different feelings I have about this, but how I feel about this is, how can I keep doing what I'm doing if I can't look after myself, if I can't support myself in keeping this show on the air? And what we saw a couple of weeks ago was a decent attempt, but what we found out was that this show is not sustainable in the way that it's set up right now. And so we need to move on to a different model. We're going to keep the show on, shadowdavis.com. The show will remain. It's going to be a little different. It's going to be a little more streamlined, but it's still going to be there for the all access members. As far as grifting, how many times in the 5-year history of this show have you heard me say, and I understand this has happened, but how many times have you heard me say, all right, guys, time to support. Let's do it. What I can suggest is that once a year, right around the holidays, right around Christmas, I'll say, all right, guys, it's time. Let's do this. It's the only way, that one big infusion to keep the show going, and has been for quite some time. But in the meantime, the rest of the year, I'm barely able to keep the lights on, quite literally. There are times where I've laid awake at night wondering, am I going to be able to afford the rent? Am I going to be able to keep the show going? How many times have you seen me with a guest on this show who needs money for legal fees, for personal care because they've been injured by a vaccine? That's happened over and over and over again, constantly. And I don't care, because I'm all about trying to help people. And sometimes I can see you guys sitting there going, they're asking for more money. They're asking for more money. But let me ask you, do you feel that way when Rogers charges you $150 a month for a cable package with sports and your internet? Or when McDonald's charges you $15 for a Happy Meal, or Boston Pizza charges you $30 for a ham and pineapple? Large, not even extra large. Or Tim Hortons charges you $7 or $8 for a muffin and a couple of coffees. That's all I'm asking. A lot of emails about keeping the show on the air, on social media. Lots of them. For those who can't afford it. And I understand that there are going to be some people out there who can't. $115 a year or $12, whatever. It's not expensive for all the extra content you get, for everything else you get, for the community you still get in the Telegram group. That's not expensive at all. How am I to know if somebody truly can't afford it or not? What am I supposed to do? Ask to see their bank records? How do I know somebody out there isn't just scamming me? I don't. Can I keep giving things away for free? No. For 5 years, I have been doing this show mostly out of my savings. That's gone now. That's over. It's finished. Can't do it anymore. A new model is absolutely necessary. Keeping the show on social media. It's emotional for me as well, because I've found a home here. Place to go every night, 8 o'clock for me, maybe 9 o'clock for you, 7 o'clock, whatever. So it's not going to be easy. I'm still going to be doing it. You can still find me at shadowdavis.com and in the Telegram group. As far as keeping it on Facebook and YouTube, what if I buy a subscription, Shadow? What if you get 100 more? We tried that. It didn't work. Those new subscribers, by the way, will keep getting the show because they have got an all-access subscription. So go ahead, grab yourself one. I'll see you on Monday night. Let's get into it. Is there going to be an election because of the budget, which is coming out next Tuesday? Well, some people say yeah. Some people say no. Defense Minister David McGuinty said today he has every confidence the Liberal government will pass its fall budget through the current minority parliament, despite his colleagues' concerns about securing enough votes. The arrogant government House leader, Stephen McKinnon, has warned the budget might not pass through the House of Commons after it presents next week, since the opposition parties have not ruled out voting it down. But just days after McKinnon publicly fretted about the prospect of a sudden election that would stretch over the Christmas holiday period, McGuinty told reporters in South Korea he remains confident the budget will sail through the House of Commons. I have every confidence that we will pass the budget, will earn the respect and the support in the House. It's a question of negotiations. It's a question of hang on, let me scroll this down. It's a question of making sure that we're reflecting priorities for different members of parliament. Okay, so what are those priorities? Well, on the one hand, you have a party that wants far less spending. And on the other hand, you have a party that wants far more spending. Conservative NDP caucus is weighing a budget vote that could trigger an election. Sources. Once again, CBC and their famous sources. Let me give you Don Davies. He's the interim leader of the NDP. Here's what they want.
As you know, I had the opportunity to meet with Prime Minister Carney last week and discuss the circumstances facing our country, especially in advance of an important budget that we all know is going to be announced on November 4th. It was an opportunity for me to lay out our perspective as New Democrats on where we think our economy is and what we think is needed at this point in time. First and foremost, I expressed to the Prime Minister that as a strong New Democrat opposition, we are going to be supporting policies that we agree with, and we will be opposing policies that we don't, and therefore we will wait until that budget comes out and we'll evaluate the budget based on what is contained in it. At the same time, we communicated very clearly that we would not be able to support a budget that takes an austerity approach. In our opinion, at this moment in time when We are facing serious economic headwinds and challenges from south of the border, that an economically contractionist approach to our economy is not what's called for, but rather we need to be investing. We need to be investing in Canadian communities, Canadian businesses, Canadian workers, and Canadian infrastructure.
$100 billion deficit is not enough, it seems, for the NDP, which is mind-blowing to me. According to the CBC article written by John Paul Tasker and Kate McKenna, Conservative MPs were told yesterday to avoid criticizing the NDP for now. Once again, according to these famous sources. So the Conservative and NDP caucuses are grappling with what to do about this upcoming federal budget, whether they want to be part of an effort to trigger an election by voting it down. Multiple sources. I want names, man. Multiple sources told the CBC. Senior Conservative sources say the party's leadership does not want an election right now, but they're also opposed to voting for the new Liberal government's first budget, given the potential reputational risk of backing Carney and an agenda they simply do not support. Oh, what are you going to do then? We don't support this, but we don't want an election. Flip a coin. A Conservative source says speculation about the Liberals potentially losing the budget vote is not contrived, as at this time there are not enough votes for it to pass in the House after it's tabled on Tuesday. Pierre Poilievre has made a series of demands to the Liberals in exchange for votes on the budget, including scrapping the industrial carbon tax and keeping the deficit below $42 billion. But there's no realistic expectation they'll be fulfilled, given the government has already signaled they are a non-starter. The Bloc has also made some expensive demands, including increased old age security payouts, more generous health transfers to the provinces, and interest-free loans for first-time homebuyers, policies that are unlikely to be enacted in full, given the government is intent on reining in spending. How can you be intent on reining in spending if you have a deficit of $100 billion? But the Liberals have made some outreach to the Bloc, and Thursday agreed to include at least one of their demands, a crackdown on tax evasion schemes the trucking industry has long opposed. What? Mark Carney is a tax evader. We're going to get into that in just a second. The Conservatives have had conversations with the NDP and the Bloc about how to approach the vote, according to sources. CBC News is not naming the sources because they were not authorized to speak publicly about these internal discussions. One senior NDP source and two Conservative sources say the path believed to be most likely is that some of the NDP's 7 MPs could abstain from voting, allowing the budget to pass. At Wednesday's Conservative caucus meeting, MPs were told their party's plan is to avoid criticizing the NDP for the foreseeable future. The Liberal minority government needs 3 additional votes, or 2 if the Speaker were to break a tie. Elizabeth May, the one Green MP, told the CBC today she would not support a budget that includes any fossil fuel subsidies, but otherwise is waiting to see it before deciding how she'll vote. If the Liberals can't cobble together enough support, the government could fall and Canadians could be headed for an election before Christmas. Conservative sources who are familiar with party outreach on the budget said the NDP MPs are not aligned. This is something we suspected, right? And that the caucus functions without much structure because they're not an official party. A Conservative source says the small NDP caucus may have conflicting priorities, which could make it easier to convince individual MPs to vote for the budget or against it. The scenario could deliver the necessary votes to get the document through the House of Commons without the NDP going all in on the Liberal agenda. Government House Leader Steve McKinnon, meanwhile, is publicly urging the Conservatives to vote for the budget to avoid an election so soon after the last one. Walk down the aisle and tell the grinchy leader of the opposition to vote for the budget. Don't ruin Christmas. Build Canada strong. How is an election ruining Christmas? Could be one of the best Christmas presents ever. But then again, either way, the NDP is strapped for cash, no leader. After the party's poor showing in the last election, the NDP produced their worst result in a generation after propping up the last Liberal minority government. Yeah, it's true. It's very true. Look at this. From Canada, CanadianMortgageTrends.com. Canada's deficit to surge to $100 billion. That is 3% of our GDP, folks. 3%. That's dangerously high, just like the PBO said about a month ago. Parliamentary Budget Officer. One of Canada's major lenders says Carney will push the country's deficit to about 3% of its gross domestic product as his government pursues major products and tries to attract more investment. Stéphane Marion of the National Bank of Canada, he's the chief economist there. He said he expects Ottawa's fiscal shortfall will reach $100 billion this fiscal year, more than double the $42 billion the government forecast in December. Speaking at Bloomberg's Canadian Finance Conference Tuesday, Marion called Carney's upcoming fiscal update, well, it's a budget. It's not a fiscal update, November 4th. The most consequential budget in a generation after a decade of suboptimal economic policy. And the Liberals in this budget have pledged $660 million for equity programs, defend generational debt strategy. $660 million in new funding for gender equality and 2SLGB2QIA communities over the next 5 years. I have one question for them, and that is, what is a woman? Canadian sovereignty is at stake, according to Sam Cooper. He testified at a hearing in Parliament just about 2 weeks ago. But first, here's Michael Barrett talking about Brookfield Asset Management and how corrupt they are.
Revelations at the Ethics Committee have exposed the Prime Minister's company, Brookfield, as one of Canada's largest tax dodgers. Leading tax transparency experts show that Brookfield avoided an incredible $6.5 billion in Canadian taxes through the use of offshore tax havens over just 5 years. Now, while chair of Brookfield, the Prime Minister set up 3 multi-billion-dollar investment funds in Bermuda and the Cayman Islands, shielding profits from Canadian taxes. And these are funds that could line the Prime Minister's pockets through future bonus payments. Canadians deserve to know that the Prime Minister is making decisions in the public interest, not his own financial interest. That's why it was shocking that Liberals voted to try to shut down this investigation to improve transparency for Canadians. While Liberals vote to protect powerful politicians, Conservatives will stand up for hardworking Canadian taxpayers. We will not back down. We will defend hardworking Canadian taxpayers, and we're going to hold this Liberal Prime Minister accountable. Here. No.
Are you? All right, then. Michael Barrett's the face of this Liberal corruption and getting the word out about this Chinese infiltration. Sam Cooper as well with the Bureau. And if you haven't looked at his work, you can check it out on Substack, thebureau.com. And yes, he did testify at committee. Ethics, the Standing Committee on Ethics and Transparency a couple of weeks ago. Very interesting what he had to say regarding Mark Carney's involvement in Brookfield and Brookfield's involvement with high-level officials in China.
Notes that Brookfield maintained over $3 billion in politically sensitive investments connected to China and its state-linked real estate and energy companies. Can you explain how Prime Minister Carney's role in Brookfield's ties to the regime in China?
Sure, I'll go off memory of my own reporting. Thinking of that story, which I wrote in the lead up to the federal election, I researched into Brookfield's investments in China. And on the real estate file, I noted that after 2015, Brookfield had made very substantial China-based real estate investments. And due to my knowledge of Beijing's United Front networks, I noted that one of the key Hong Kong investors connected to the projects in which Brookfield was investing was part of China's political consultative conference. That was important to me because the Central Intelligence Agency notes that people on that high-level Chinese communist entity are involved, the CIA says, in Beijing's sort of global United Front networks. That's how the Chinese Communist Party brings influential people together. So I noted in my reporting that for Brookfield to get access to that same type of investment project on a major real estate deal in China, together with a very elite Hong Kong real estate tycoon, certainly in my learned opinion, would take a special kind of access to get that kind of deal. So then tracking forward through when Prime Minister Carney joins Brookfield, in the surrounding years, I noted that the real estate market in China had plummeted. At some point, Brookfield needed to secure some, let's call it sort of a re-injection of capital, and it turned out that it emerged that the Bank of China, as others have reported, was involved in bridging some capital to reinfuse that deal in China's troubled real estate market. So stepping back from that, I noted that people in Mr. Carney's position in Brookfield, Mr. Carney also traveling to China to meet with senior Communist Party officials around the timing of the Bank of China, assisting Brookfield with their real estate investment. That would certainly, in my mind, raise, the questions around access and influence.
Mr. Carney was the chair at Brookfield during that time. Then he enters public office. You talk about his ties, relationships with the regime in China. Is there any evidence to suggest that those ties have been maintained since he's entered elected office?
Well, in my research focusing on Brookfield, which is the nature already in previous testimony, I heard Brookfield and Mr. Carney's 103 potential investment vulnerabilities come up. Look, my work is based on open source investigations, and Mr. Carney, I noted in the timeline back to his days with the Bank of England, had worked on establishing a special relationship between the Bank of England and the Bank of China, and which is, of course, controlled by the Chinese Communist Party in terms of global monetary systems. So I felt that was important as a researcher. Through the years, Mr. Carney, when he joins Brookfield, prior to entering politics, repeatedly travels to Beijing and meets with officials, including President Xi Jinping. And I noted that for business persons at that time of Mr. Carney's stature to appear with Xi Jinping, again, as China's economy is in need of foreign investment, and while investments into China are becoming more dangerous in the view of some Western capitalists, having Mr. Carney be in those meetings, I do think is important. And you could say fairly is beneficial to Xi Jinping, as it would be beneficial to Mark Carney, the business person, in his time at Brookfield. So when we enter Mr. Carney's race to become the Liberal nominee for Prime Minister, I did note that as the Globe and Mail broke the story that Mr. Carney met with an entity called the Jiangsu Chamber of Commerce in Toronto, I was very aware already that Commerce Department had overt ties to the United Front Work Department, and indeed politically connected Canadians are honorary chairs with that entity. So I do think there's much reporting that hasn't come out on exactly what the Jiangsu Chamber of Commerce is and what Mr. Carney's meeting, which he denied at first, as you know, he denied elements of the Globe and Mail's reporting. So there's controversy around what really happened in that meeting.
Who is this guy? Who is Mark Carney? This goes back to 2021, not 2019. June of 2021. Peter Foster writes, Mark Carney, man of destiny, wants to revolutionize society. It will not be pleasant. What Carney ultimately wants is a technocratic dictatorship justified by climate alarmism. This is before Mark Carney was in the public consciousness. Before he was into politics, he was just working behind the scenes at this stage of the game. Mark Carney has announced his candidacy for the Liberal Party leadership, blah, blah, blah. In his book, Values, Building a Better World for All, Mark Carney, former governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, claims that Western society is morally rotten and that it's been corrupted by capitalism, which has brought about a climate emergency that threatens life on Earth. This, he claims, requires rigid controls on personal freedom, industry, and corporate funding. Carney's views are important because he is UN Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance. This was, again, 2021. He's also an advisor both to British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on the next big climate conference in Glasgow and to Justin Trudeau. Since the advent of the COVID pandemic, Carney has been front and center in the promotion of a political agenda known as the Great Reset or the Green New Deal or Building Back Better. All are predicated on the claim that COVID and its disruption of the global economy provides a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity not just to regulate climate, but to frame a more fair, more diverse, more inclusive, more safe, and more woke world. Carney draws inspiration from, among others, Marx, Engels, and Lenin. But the agenda he promotes differs from Marxism in two key respects. First, the private sector is not to be expropriated, but made a partner in reshaping the economy and society. Same thing. Second, it does not make a promise to make the lives of ordinary people better, but worse. Now, again, this is 6 years ago, this article, 4 years ago. And what did Carney just say? We need to prepare to make sacrifices. Carney's Brave New World will be one of severely constrained choice, less flying, less meat, more inconvenience, more poverty. Assets will be stranded. Used gasoline-powered cars will be unsaleable. Inefficient properties will be unrentable, he promises. The agenda's objectives are, in fact, already being enforced, not primarily by legislation, but by the application of non-governmental, this is non-democratic, pressure on the corporate sector via the ever-expanding dictates of ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance, and by sustainable finance, which is designed to starve non-compliant companies of funds, thus rendering them, as Carney puts it, climate roadkill. What ESG actually represents is corporate ideological compulsion. It's a key instrument of stakeholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism. Carney's agenda is promoted by the United Nations and other international bureaucracies and a vast and ever-growing array of non-governmental organizations, and fora, especially the World Economic Forum, where Carney is a trustee. Also, perhaps most surprisingly, by its corporate victims. No one wants to become climate roadkill. Carney clearly feels himself to be a man of destiny. When I worked at the Bank of England, he writes in Values, I would remind myself each morning of Marcus Aurelius' phrase, arise to do the work of humankind. One is reminded of French aristocrat and social reformer Henri de Saint-Simon, the Grand Seigneur Sans Culotte, who ordered his valet to wake him with similar words. Remember, Monsieur le Comte, that you have great things to do. What an egomaniac. That's not the only thing Carney has in common with Saint-Simon, who believed that society should be ruled by savants such as himself, an alliance of engineers and other technocratic intellectuals along with bankers. Carney is very much a banker technocrat, not merely at ease gliding along the corridors of global bureaucratic power, but expert at framing arguments that support an ever-expanding role for his class. His expansive pretensions first appeared at the Bank of Canada. If the economy is like a game of hockey, then central bankers should ideally be like Zamboni drivers, whose job it is to keep the ice clean and flat. Carney had, in fact, been a goalie during his academic years at both Harvard and Oxford. The man can't skate. I really doubt that. At the Bank of Canada, he often seemed like the Zamboni driver who thought he was Wayne Gretzky. He could never resist lecturing private businesses to stop sitting on dead money or telling them they were too timid in the international arena, or advising consumers they were spending too little or borrowing too much. He promoted macro-prudence, the idea that regulators, in their panoptic wisdom, would focus on the forest, not the trees. Now he wants to establish himself as an intellectual. Carney has a lot to put straight with the world, according to his new book and the related BBC Reef lectures that Carney delivered last year. The three great crises of credit, 2008-2009 version, COVID and climate are all rooted in a single problem. People in general, markets in particular, are not as wise, moral, or far-seeing as Mark Carney. He sums up this failing as the tragedy of the horizon, a phrase he concocted for a speech ahead of the 2015 Paris Climate Conference. However, Carney is sophistic when it comes to the alleged moral shortcomings of capitalism. It's been one of the most tedious tropes of the left since at least the Communist Manifesto that the rise of commerce would drive out all that is virtuous in society, leaving nothing but the cash nexus of trade. One of Carney's favorite philosophers is Harvard's Michael Sandel, who produces endless trivial examples suggesting we have moved from a market economy to a market society. Should sex be up for sale? Carney thunders, following Sandel. Should there be a market in the right to have children? Why not auction the right to opt out of military service? Why shouldn't universities sell admission to raise money for worthy causes? But the very fact, hang on a second, I don't know where this thing popped up. There we go. Why shouldn't universities sell admission to raise money for worthy causes? But the very fact that people reflexively feel uneasy about or outright reject such notions entirely disproves his point. People don't believe that everything is or should be for sale. Carney notes the long debate going back to classical times on the nature of commercial value. This was theoretically resolved by the marginalist revolution, which put paid to the paradox of value that puzzled over the usually low price of useful water and the usually high price of useless diamonds. The marginalists pointed out that commercial value isn't determined by usefulness or labor input. It's inevitably subjective, based on personal preferences and available resources. There's no paradox. Someone dying of thirst in the middle of the desert might be more than willing to offer a bucket of diamonds for a bucket of water. However, market valuations are essentially different from moral values, a distinction Carney continually muddles. He misrepresents the marginalist subjective perspective, claiming that it implies that anything not commercially priced is not considered valuable. Market value, he writes, is taken to represent intrinsic value, and if a good or activity is not in the market, it is not valued. But who holds such an idiotic view? Nobody. Prices, their family, children, friends, community spirit, or the beauties of nature, although there is certainly lots of calculation going on in the background. Carney constantly berates market fundamentalist strawmen who employ standard economic reasoning and who believe that people are rational and markets perfect. He incorrectly claims that Adam Smith, in his first great book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, said that a sense of morality was not inherent. In fact, Smith believes that we're born with such a sense, which is then fine-tuned by society or the one we grow up in. However, Carney, like all leftists, leans toward the blank slate, nurture over nature perspective because it suggests that human nature might be beneficially reformed under the right, that is, the left, social arrangements. Carney believes our moral sentiments started going astray around the time of the publication of Smith's better-known book, The Wealth of Nations, in 1776, when the Industrial Revolution was beginning to take off. He rightly suggests that one should read both books to gain a full appreciation of Smith's insights, but he seems to have missed the significance of Smith's put-down of whining and melancholy moralists, his cynicism about insidious and crafty politicians, and his thoroughgoing skepticism about those who would trade for the public good, that is, the ESG crowd. Moreover, Smith noted the greatest corrupter of moral sentiments was not commerce, but faction and fanaticism, that is, politics and religion, which come together in the toxic stew of climate alarmism and ESG. ESG used to be called corporate social responsibility, or CSR. The Nobel economist Milton Friedman warned against its subversive nature 50 years ago. He noted that taking on externally dictated social responsibilities beyond those directly related to a company's business opened the floodgates to endless pressure and interference. The big questions are responsibility to whom and for what? Carney also typically misrepresents Friedman, suggesting that he claimed that shareholders should rank Uber allies and to the exclusion of other legitimate stakeholders such as employees and local communities. Carney claims that at times, large positive gains could accrue to society if small sacrifices were made on behalf of shareholders. But by what right would management sacrifice shareholders, and who would decide which sacrifices should be made? Carney admits that the integrated reporting required by ESG is a morass. ESG ratings consider hundreds of metrics, with many of them qualitative in nature. Putting values to work is hard work. But as with virtue, it should become easier with sustained practice. No need to ask whose version of values and virtue is to prevail. Despite his thorough castigation of market society, Carney somehow also believes this corroded society is clamoring to make great personal sacrifices for draconian climate actions and the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. We could go on, but you guys could find that article. There's way more to cover. You guys can find that article in the archives of the National Post. And everybody needs to read that book, Values, as boring a read as it is. I think it's 500 pages long. We need to read this book. We need to figure out who this man is. All Canadians have a responsibility to know who this man is and what he wants before another election, which could be happening before Christmas. And some people are very happy that there's another election possibly coming up because this time we're going to win. Have you forgotten that these people still exist? Somehow, even though Mark Carney has not yet secured a deal with Donald Trump, somehow, if there is to be an election campaign, you can bet that those same people, they'll vote for him, even though he's delivered nothing. Nothing. Zero, zilch, nada. I don't know how, but they will. This is the problem with, what did Winston Churchill once say? The problem with democracy is people. I'm paraphrasing, but it was something like that. Hey, what's going on in the Peel Regional School District?
They're still coming after children. And this time, the school boards are going to extreme lengths to get to kids without the parents ever finding out. What I'm about to show you came out of the Peel District School Board in Ontario. But it looks like this is happening in other school boards, other provinces, and other districts. This was posted in the students' Google Classroom. This was not circulated to parents. This was internal announcement only for students. It's basically general announcements, holidays, religious and creed celebrations, and again, for students, not to parents. But if you keep scrolling, it gets to this colorful Gen Express flyer. Apparently, they're going to have Zoom meetings during school hours for the students, so not at home, not around parents, every Thursday for the entire month of November. Well, it doesn't say who they're talking to, but it says they're going to talk about navigating transitions and exploring problems in the home. Problems in the home? I think the problem is outside of the home. These shady characters trying to get access to kids without the parents even knowing. This was not informed to parents. They never asked parents for consent. And if you know kids in middle school, you can't even go across the street to the local park without parent consent. Let's keep going. So if you open this up, you get to the registration page. And here again, it talks about discussing issues inside of the household and problems with families. And now they're asking for the student's personal email, as well as their cell phone number, and asking if it's safe to leave a voicemail on there. How much more secretive could this get? Mental health interventions are not part of the standard school curriculum. It is not part of the transaction that parents agreed to. It had nothing to do with diagnosing children, giving them mental health advice, or even giving them therapy, counseling, and helping them navigate transition. These kinds of conversations 100% require parental consent. This is outlined in Ontario's Education Act, and other provinces have a similar one. Secondly, are these people who are conducting these sessions actually qualified professionals? Are they psychologists? Are they social workers? Don't parents have a right to know that information if they're talking to their kids? Without a curriculum or any kind of subject matter for parents to review, how do we know what they're doing? And third, if they are discussing medical or mental health conditions, these things fall under the Personal Health Information Protection Act. How are these things being discussed openly on a Zoom call with minors without their parents present? Anytime that a child's information is being shared, especially with an outside third party, parents have to give consent. Ontario school boards have to follow the Ministry of Education's guidelines around privacy when it comes to children's information and when it comes to being transparent with parents whenever there's a matter of treatment or therapy or counseling. There are so many issues with what's happening here. Parents have to take 20 minutes a day to talk to their children and ask them, what are they hearing in school? What are they learning in school? Are there weird guest speakers coming in to give them a talk about whatever? Are there any weird presentations happening in the classroom that fall outside of the purview of academic learning? We can't beat this whole system, but we can control what happens in our homes by speaking to our kids and by teaching them what to look out for. Remember, these schools were put in your neighborhood to service the families in that neighborhood. We are the customer. Go see the school principal. Don't be afraid to push back. These are our kids, not theirs.
Well, that's a very good point. And the question was raised a couple of years ago, remember? And the question still really hasn't been answered fully and completely yet. Are there parental rights in Canada? Well, we go to the Alberta Parents Union.ca webpage for the answer to that. Now, this is a political webpage, and most things, sadly, are political these days. You can't really find straight answers to anything anymore. It's become fashionable in some political circles to claim there's no such thing as parental rights in Canada. And they say this new fad seems to have taken off after a comment made last year by Trudeau when he politicized the concept of parental rights. Again, this came out last year. Far-right political actors are trying to outdo themselves with the types of cruelty and isolation they can inflict on these already vulnerable people. Now, predictably, the NDP is joining in. Federal Justice spokesperson, Member of Parliament Randall Garrison, claiming in a video that has since gone viral that parental rights don't exist at all. Garrison said, and I remember playing this video on the show, there's no such thing as parental rights in Canada. There are parental responsibilities. Others like Egale Canada, one of the organizations suing provinces that respect parental rights, have gone even further, praising Cuba, of all places, for replacing parental authority with parental responsibility and conferring on children the right to gender identity. Cuba, once again, stands as a beacon of hope for the rest of the world still fighting for equality rights. Seriously, they say? All these ideas are, of course, nonsense on stilts. Parents are the real experts in their own kids. Parents are the best advocates for their kids. Parents are the most loving force in their kids' lives. And for all these reasons, parents, not the government, have the responsibility to look after their kids' upbringing, including their education. And rights are how parents are empowered to fulfill those responsibilities. We think the existence and importance of these rights is self-evident for people like Justin Trudeau, Randall Garrison, and groups like Egale Canada, who pretend not to understand this. Here's some more evidence. First, parental rights are explicitly mentioned in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms when it comes to things like educational choice and language rights. The Charter clearly and explicitly recognizes that a child's right to access the education that fits for them is best secured by parental rights to choose that education. Second, there are, at last count, 90 different Canadian laws that either mention parental rights explicitly or use an equivalent phrase. Third, there are over 2,500 court decisions mentioning parental rights and finding, among other things, that Section 2 of the Charter means parents have the constitutional right to determine all aspects of their children's education, including choosing a religious education. So yes, parents have rights in Canada, especially when it comes to education. The Cowichan land situation in BC is not going anywhere. Here's Dallas Brody of 1BC in the legislature in BC just today.
Mr. Speaker, you will own nothing and be happy. That is the true mantra of this government. In 2019, the property rights of British Columbians were quietly surrendered with the passage of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, also known as DRIPA. DRIPA was a Trojan horse. It turned what appeared to be a harmless and well-meaning United Nations aspiration into binding law. What few realized at the time was that DRIPA mandated the voluntary transfer of property and democratic authority from citizens to unelected and unaccountable tribal chiefs. It was under DRIPA that the Attorney General, now the Premier, instructed provincial lawyers in the Cowichan case not to use their strongest legal argument, namely that Aboriginal title had been extinguished. That was a specific written directive. Mr. Speaker, we can defend property rights or we can defend DRIPA, but we cannot do both. This bill, the Property Rights Protection Act, repeals DRIPA in its entirety and restores to the province its exclusive jurisdiction over property and civil rights. This bill declares that the UN Declaration on the Rights...
She is introducing a private member's bill to get rid of DRIPA UNDRIP. Listen to the vote at the end of this clip.
Rights of Indigenous peoples has no legal force or effect. This bill directs public officials to defend the property rights of British Columbians to the full extent permitted by law. This bill requires meaningful consultation with property owners before any government decisions can impact their property rights. This bill stands for the simple principle that what you own in British Columbia belongs to you, not to the government and not to its friends. It is upon this solid foundation that we pledge to rebuild this province, beginning with this magnificent bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members, the question is first reading of the bill. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay. They didn't want it. They didn't want it. They don't want to protect your property rights in British Columbia. There are really no property rights. This is according to our friend John Carpe from the JCCF. He says, no, there's really not any property rights written into our charter or the Constitution in this country. Now, I'm sure there is legal matter. I talked about it a couple of nights ago. There is legal precedent for property rights. But why does everything have to go to freaking court these days? And interestingly, as a quick aside, if the government, federal or provincial, of British Columbia doesn't have right to the land at all in BC, then how does the CFIA have jurisdiction to walk onto somebody's property and kill their ostriches? I'm sorry, but we don't own this land. You don't own this land. You have no jurisdiction here. You can't come on here and just kill. This land is up for grabs, baby. Dan Dix from Press for Truth put out a great piece today.
Thought the Cowichan Nation claiming traditional territory on prime Richmond real estate was bad? Just wait till you see what Western Quebec is now going through, as it just got a First Nation-sized plot twist. I warned you that Richmond, BC was just the beginning, and that there was nothing stopping other Indigenous tribes from claiming private lands all across the country. Well, folks, that is exactly what's now happening. So first of all, Richmond homeowners are hard-working families who have poured their blood, sweat, and life savings into their land. And they are under direct attack. The government is just sitting on their hands, watching your titles get shredded. This all started with the Cowichan Nation claiming traditional territory on prime Richmond real estate. The court ruled that their Aboriginal title coexists with your fee simple ownership. Coexists? How do two exclusive owners share the same land? The answer is they don't. Mayor Malcolm Brody called it a complete and utter shock. He said it jeopardizes private fee simple rights all across BC. Hundreds of people packed a public hearing at the Sheraton Airport Hotel to voice their displeasure with this decision, with many of them saying, "This isn't reconciliation. It's theft." Well, now for other homeowners all across the nation, their worst fears are coming to fruition because Quebec's First Nations have just slapped a massive Aboriginal title claim on huge chunks of Western Quebec. We're talking Gatineau Park, islands in the Ottawa River, prime wildlife reserves, the Basketong Reservoir, and lands that all fall right smack in the middle of Gatineau City. First Nation files Aboriginal title claim to lands in Western Quebec. An Algonquin First Nation has filed a title claim in Quebec Superior Court over large swaths of territory across the west of the province and is also seeking $5 billion from governments and crown corporations. That's public land. Your parks, your hydroelectric dams, your forests. They are now saying, this is ours. And on top of that, they want $5 billion in damages from the federal government. Why? Because according to Chief Jean-Guy Whiteduck, billions of dollars have been taken out of our lands with limited return. And all of the dams were built without our approval. We were never compensated. They're pointing to some 260-year-old treaty from 1760, the Treaty of Swagachi, and the Royal Proclamation of 1763, ancient history, to squeeze billions of dollars from taxpayers today. But hold on, Dan. Chief Whiteduck says this won't touch private homeowners. This is just the public lands they want to control, like water, wildlife, forestry, and your recreation. Richmond homeowners were told the same thing, but look what's happening there now. How voluntary is reconciliation again? Governments ignored them for decades, so now it's court time. The Quebec Superior Court. And with the recent ruling, like the Cowichan case, handing titles to tribes, this could explode all across the country. Guys, this is the Indigenous grievance industry in action. Endless claims, massive payouts, and no end game. So it's time to wake up, Canadians. Your tax dollars, your parks, your power are all on the chopping block for reconciliation that never ends. This isn't justice. It's a shakedown. So please share this video far and wide and get the word out that this land grab is accelerating.
Okay, so I want to show you guys something that happened in Winnipeg a few years ago. We had the Bay downtown, one of the flagship stores years and years and years ago, like 100 years ago. I think it's still there. The building still exists. It's 7 stories tall. It takes up an entire city block. It's huge. Now, when department stores started having trouble, I think just a little bit before COVID, they reduced services at this facility from 7 floors down to 2 floors down to 1 floor until they finally said, all right, we're done with this store. And then they completely liquidated. But they tried to keep that store open as long as they could. So the ownership of that location switched to the province of Manitoba and the city of Winnipeg, who turned around and gave it to one of the local Indian tribes who were supposed to redevelop it under the deal they made for assisted living spaces for elders, museum and gallery. And none of it has happened. None of it has happened. And this building has been sitting empty now for pretty close to 5 years in the downtown. This massive building has been sitting empty. And now, because nothing has been done, no progress has been made, the cost of redeveloping this building is now $310 million, the Southern Chiefs are saying. The cost, the Southern Chiefs organization announced yesterday it's going to cost $310 million to transform the Hudson Bay Company's 99-year-old Winnipeg flagship into this mixed-use development called Wewene Bagangikong. It was supposed to cost $130 million 3 years ago when the Hudson's Bay Company announced the transfer of the 6-story, 655,000 square foot building. But the project cost raised to $200 million, and then now it's $310 million. And SEO Grand Chief Jerry Daniel said the cost increase is due to more accurate budgeting and a more detailed design for complex adaptive reuse. And they're never, ever going to do anything with that building. Ever. Because it's all about getting money from all three levels of government and then giving it to the chiefs, splitting it amongst themselves, letting their people starve, and gambling in Atlantic City, and keeping the Indian industry going. That's all this is. So if you think they want your land, yeah, they do. But they don't want the land because they're never going to do anything with it. But they want the money associated with the land. They want the money associated with any electricity or anything generated off that land. That's what they want. They don't want your land. They want the money associated to the land forever. And until somebody stands up and calls that out, it will never end. Billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars going into the Indian industry every year, and nobody ever says anything about it ever because they're too scared. You become a denier, a residential school denier. That's it for the show tonight, you guys. Part 4 of the conclusion of the fall of the Cabal. Very excited about that. Is coming up in the extension in just a couple of minutes. And for the rest of you, I love you all, appreciate you all, and I'll catch you tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Central for the last social media episode of Shadow at Night ever. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye for now.